All right, this is Nate and Lizette, Startup Nation, episodes 9 and 10 today. We are going to be talking to Lizette today about a few businesses she runs. One of them is called Calmex. The other one, I will butcher the name, but it's Fila Bella, I believe, something similar to that. And it's basically, they are shippers and growers of flowers and like things. And we're going to be discussing with her how she runs multiple businesses and how she juggles that in regards to working with family, in addition to the fact of how she manages turnover in an environment where it's very blue collar, which is something I can relate to with Green Guard. So listen in episodes 9 and 10. Lizette, say hello.
Hi.
All right, so Lizette, let's talk a little bit about working within family. So I have a little bit of experience with that. My brother has worked with Green Guard 3 times now. And so I'll go, he's no longer with Green Guard. He's decided to do his own thing, but I can definitely talk a little bit about that. You are, I think, probably have even more experience with that because it's not just a single relative. I know your sister just recently started working with you. I know your mom and dad work with you. So tell me, and people out there that have a lot of questions on when they're either going to take over the family business or they're going to be involved, some of the experiences you've had, both positive, negative, maybe some hopeful hints, things like that.
Okay. Well, I started working with my parents. I did a lot of summers working with them, but it was odd jobs, right? It was nothing exciting. It was like filing and mundane tasks. And then when I really started working with them was the end of 2008. And that was a very big transition for me. I went from a very corporate environment to working in an industry that wasn't per se very professional in all their ways. And so I used to be like law, like work in the district attorney's office.
So you went to 2 extremes then.
Very big 2 extremes. Language was very loose too.
Yep.
But so that was interesting to begin with. And then working with my parents was a big transition, mainly because I wasn't used to it, but 2, there was different expectations for me. And my dad is someone who my parents both are immigrants. They both worked really hard to make this company. And so I'm the first generation in the US. And given that my parents weren't people that necessarily patted you on the back for doing well, it was just expected that you did well. And so that was kind of hard. And also when things went wrong, it was also really easy for them to, I would say, take it out. It was tough love, but it was very easy to kind of, handle it differently with me as opposed to an employee. And so I would take it very personal when I first started working there.
So let me touch on that then, because it's something that, I haven't had to necessarily work for my parents, but I could understand how that perspective is. So just to give some more clarity, Lizette's the COO of the company. She basically runs the company. So her parents are definitely involved from my understanding, but but the eventual transition would be that she runs them. And so that's the anticipation, is that she's running some multi-million-dollar businesses here. So if I would presume that if they were to have just hired Nathan for conversation's sake to take the role on because you never did, those expectations probably would have been a little bit more like corporate per se, even though it's still a small business. But because of the fact that it's a family member, you've had to battle not only the fact that you still have to run it as a corporation, but that the expectations are different because of it being a family member. Right.
I mean, what we strive as a company to achieve is to be corporate but have a family feel. So regardless, whoever comes into the company, we want them to feel like this is home, because you want employee retention. But it is different when it is working for your parents and there are such high expectations. I would take everything personal and take it home with me. I learned that after speaking to my dad, I learned that wasn't his intention. It was just tough love. And it was also hard to go from, my dad basically is like, you can't train anybody until you know the process. So he started me at the way bottom. Other people think that you go in and you're just like this glorified child of owners, and you're not. You do everything, all the grunt work in order to build your way up, which I appreciate now. But in that moment, you're like,
Why am I having to do this? Yeah.
And think about 2008 when I started, the economy had just collapsed,
Sure.
right? No one was hiring people, so that was hard to begin with. And then your pay, once you graduate college, you expect that your pay is going to be substantially better.
And it wasn't, right?
And it wasn't, especially working for my parents. So it was just like, wow, this is really hard.
Yeah.
But slowly, when we opened our second company, Fiorabella, it was 2009. It was actually March 9th of 2009. So we'll be celebrating 10 years next month. So we're really excited about that. That was really my baby. That's what I nurtured, and that's what I grew. And it was really a moment for me to come into my own and really show my parents that I was capable of running a business. Granted, it didn't happen overnight.
And you were there the whole time over the 10 years?
I was there over the 10-year process. I remember when my dad wanted to take this venture on, he was very comfortable. Like, my parents are older, they're just comfortable with where they're at, and it was basically, if we do this, it's going to be expected of you to grow it and
nurture it. And
so
all that.
it's a lot to take on at 21, 2009, but it was a really great growth experience. I learned everything from the basics of shipping to every step that we do there in order to really be able to help manage.
How do you do that now, though, where the people that have been there anywhere from 3 to 8 years says, oh, Lizette, she clearly knows what she's doing. She has this feeling of being the superior and being a leader and all that. But then you get somebody that's brand new that comes in that doesn't know you, and they're like, there's this 30-year-old woman that's running this big business. She's just the owner's kid. Do you have that issue at this point now, or no, because of the fact that everybody else kind of explains the fact that you've earned that right to be in that position?
I don't feel like I have it as much now. I do remember going to my first official convention as an employee of the company, and a lady who worked for a different company said, oh, that's cute, you're working for your parents' business. And it's not glamorous in any way. Like, my parents have taught us hard work. And so I did take offense to it, but obviously being in a professional environment around other people, you can't show that. It upset you. But it's something that I held on for a really long time.
I remember you telling me that, because we were at the gym the other day and you're like, that still makes you mad when you see her there, right? But
it does, but now I feel like I've earned the respect. It's not glamorous. I've definitely, in growing the company, there was definitely a growth period of 3 years where I worked Monday through Sunday, and I worked 15 plus hour days, and I was at the office until 1 o'clock to 2 a.m. if needed, and then back at 5 a.m. So it was like you'd go home and nap. Mentally, you're exhausted. Physically, you haven't really maybe done too much.
Sat in a chair most of the time now.
But it's...
Sounds familiar.
Yeah.
I did that for a number of years. So
Right.
Talk about that transition a little bit, specifically the family. So because I don't even know CalMex and then this other business you have, how do they relate to each other, and how's that orientation work? And because it sounds like you basically raised Fiorabella, right? I mean, that was your baby, and CalMex was the parent company that your parents had originated, right? Okay.
So my parents started CalMex. My mom immigrated here when she was 18. She worked in the flower industry her whole life, basically went from picking to packing the flowers to being in an office, not comfortable with speaking the language, but she became the sales manager, ran that company successfully for 23 years.
Was it hers or somebody she worked for?
Someone she worked for. Okay. She ran the company in the sales department for them for 23 years. My dad went to school and he studied accounting. He never graduated with his BA. He was a few classes short of it, but basically he has the accounting background, and I don't know, at one point he wanted to work for himself.
Sure.
And they took a big leap of faith and started that company in '96.
And what's the main function of that company, CalMex?
They are growers and shippers of cut flowers and greens.
Okay.
We have acreage, over 500 acres in Valley Center and Fallbrook, where we grow the flowers, and then we bring it to our distribution center in Vista, and we ship it throughout the U.S. and Canada.
So that gets your perspective on the size of the company and what she's responsible for, and then the company you've basically nurtured. How do they come into this?
Well, like I said, in 2007, 2008, we saw the economy decline, and because of that decline, there was people out of jobs, And unfortunately, in our industry, people are not very sophisticated with cash flow and don't necessarily, understand that cash is king. So the economy hit, people went out of business. We were presented with being able to start a company in Northern California, which was going to be a big benefit to us, being able to have product that was grown in California in both Southern and Northern California. So we took like any starting a new company, you just take a leap of faith, and we started Fiorabella, and that's kind of how that came into be. It's kind of similar to CalMex, but it's somewhat different because in that company, we actually have a retail department. So we sell specifically to retail.
You have a storefront then, or is it?
No,
or you sell directly versus wholesalers? I gotcha.
Yes,
okay.
Except the misconception when you tell anyone you're in floral is that you're florists.
Yeah.
And we're not. We don't sell directly to the public. We sell to wholesalers and retail stores. It takes a village to run a company, and I'm immensely grateful for our employees. With that, you meet people, you make connections, and we were able to actually get into retail stores, and that's primarily one of my biggest functions. It's what I nurtured was growing the retail department and being able to sell to mass market stores.
Okay, so you're just talking about larger grocery chains, things like that sort. Interesting. And so one of the things that we've talked about with multiple businesses, because there's Warren Buffett says that he firmly believes that having multiple streams of revenue is something. And then there's people that would make the argument that if you do that, you're not focused on one specific business, and then that business might not grow as efficiently as you'd like it to. So there's multiple rules of thought there. And you throw in a little Grant Cardone in there, saying cash is king, by the way, too. If people know Grant Cardone, I listen to him a lot. So, but what are your thoughts on, since you had, how many years of experience did you have with CalMex before the second business opened?
Full-time with CalMex, besides the summers, It was only maybe half a year before we started Fiorabella, because I started full-time was basically November 2008, and we opened Fiorabella in March of 2009. Oh, wow. So it was a very short period of time. Granted, when we opened, I was involved in some of the logistics, but I didn't comprehend everything because I was learning a lot of it, and I had to definitely go back to school and take finance courses and take other classes because my background was more law. So I couldn't necessarily apply that into business very much. I learned hands-on a lot of things, which was beneficial to me. I
think that's, to be honest, that's more practical than trying to learn from a book. I'm a firm believer in that school teaches you how to learn, but I don't know if it necessarily is something where you can retain a lot of information unless it's something specific to law, right? And so even though you weren't there a significant amount of time with CalMex, you had a bunch of summers involved. Mm-hmm. I presume opening that second business was probably easier than opening the first one just because you had a lot of processes and procedures in place. Can you talk a little bit about how that dynamic worked? I know they probably developed a lot of them, but when you guys opened Fiorabella, was it something where you had a lot of the HR policies and all that stuff already in place?
Yes and no. It was a big learning curve, to be honest, because it runs completely differently. The sales team is very different. Our sales team each individually had 20 plus years of experience in the floral industry, so they were kind of set in their ways, and they didn't really want to change it. So processes that we were putting into place were new for them, and they had it was just kind of a funny transition time. We still laugh at one of our biggest errors, and it sounds really silly because it goes through multiple people, but we remember one sales agent put through an order that was meant for 10 bunches of roses or something, not roses, but an item, flower. And they were supposed, they put the order through, and then it goes to shipping, and then it goes to the floor to packaging, and he had put 10 and 10. So it was supposed to be 10 bunches and 10 boxes, and it was going FedEx. Well, in our industry, even the floor staff that we had hired was experienced because they were people that were out of jobs, but they
already knew the process.
They knew the processes, and you kind of thought, you don't need to explain things to them, and to other people it may not seem common sense, but to them it would seem common sense to say, hey, why are we putting 10 bunches in 10, one bunch per box?
Individual boxes,
and sending it FedEx, which is expensive. Why aren't we putting them all in one box and it's going to the exact same address? Well, no one questioned it. It went through multiple hands, and at the end, the customer actually sent us pictures of their receiving team opening box per box, like one bunch in each box, and you're like, oh my gosh, like so embarrassed. You're brand new, you just started, and you make an error like this. Obviously, we ended up having to pay that freight.
Yeah.
It's a learning curve, but
So what would you guys do to correct that so that doesn't happen again? What was the process?
Well, then we had to actually basically train each department on how we operate at CalMax, which was easier, but also knowing that what they did was completely different. At CalMax, we sell in bulk.
Okay.
So, and there's kind of like an item list of 20 items that we sell per season. We're seasonal too, obviously floral, so every season there's new product. It's very easy to pack a box of 20 and ship it off. At Fiorabella, it's a little bit different because we have over 200 items plus color. Wow. So you can just imagine what inventory looks like.
Significantly different.
It's very different. Inventory is key to our success. Mm-hmm. So that is hard to keep track of. And also how they pack a box. It's a specialized box more than not. So we also had to reevaluate basically the time it takes to pack a box at CalMax versus at Fiorabella, because our expectation was
certain time
and it wasn't going to be the same because they're not packing a full box of one item, they're specializing boxes.
So you can see it's funny about these types of things with businesses, even though they're very similar in nature, just because of the way they distribute and who the end user is can drastically change that process, right? And so I can tell you, with Green Guard, we're doing something very similar where we're going to be considering changing the way we offer a specific service. And in order to do that, we have to change multiple ways that process happens. Mm-hmm. And you do your best to try to proactively look at that, but things happen. So you got to be somewhat nimble in the fact of saying, oh shit, that doesn't make sense. Mistakes are going to happen. The mistake with the box thing probably wasn't significantly financial, but it was more of an embarrassment type of situation because you're new, right? I mean, who cares about the $200? That probably wasn't at the end of the day. It was a big deal, but what it did is it kind of prompted a chain reaction of process development, right, to make it more efficient. So
I think we've gotten that part kind of down, but yeah, there's always change. I mean, you don't know, especially.
And so how does that work with the family when it comes to process development now? Do you have to go through them now, or is it something where you how does process improvement and process flow work now and suggest for change based on just things happening in the market?
I think for a few years it was a learning curve. It was definitely me learning from my parents or learning from people that manage departments and me kind of modeling it. And then at one point, especially with taking on the retail stores, it became me developing it. So it was trial and error, and they backed me on it. Yep. I would have to present to them, of course, and tell them these are projections, these are estimates, this is what I think, especially because we never had a bouquet department. So making a bouquet department was
much more labor intensive.
It's more labor intensive. It's how much time are you really spending producing this, things like that. But, I was able to still grow and get a profit. So, and each year you analyze again what you're doing. Growth sometimes is hard because, being honest, my parents are both at the point where they've just been comfortable and they don't necessarily want growth. They're comfortable with where things are. My dad would like growth, but not have him included. And my mom doesn't like growth because she's someone who's very hands-on and wants to be a part of every process. So sometimes I do battle that because I see so much more potential. I see where we can grow and what we can develop, but I know that they're not on the same level with me. Yeah. So, it's interesting. My sister joined the team in November, and she quickly learned that it's a family business, and she comes from a corporate environment, and she's doing a role right now that she was not hired to do, nor did she expect to do. But you quickly learn that as a small business and predominantly as a family business, you take any role that you have to.
Wear many hats, right?
Yes, you wear lots of hats. So one moment I could be like, yes, you're working on this, but I also need you to do X task and then figure out this task. And She's like, what am I prioritizing? They're all important.
She's off camera smiling right now, by the way, so I think it's pretty funny.
She is. But I also learned with her very quickly that I was mimicking my dad's, my parents' ways with her one summer, because she came to work with us one summer and I was really hard on her. I kind of just expected her to know the process and expected her to get it right.
Did you catch yourself like, oh shit,
You know, I didn't catch myself at first, but she became very sensitive to me.
Kind of like you did?
Yes, kind of like I did. And then I realized that I was mimicking that kind of reaction, you know? Yeah. So when they told me she was coming to work with us, I really had to be mindful of it, because
be patient
and kind of really be like, you really are like another employee. I have to treat you the same.
Yeah.
But you are really comfortable with family, and so sometimes that can be hard because
it's your sister and you expect her to do more type of thing, right?
Right.
Yeah. That's the thing with my brother. So my brother worked for us for a number of years in multiple positions, and he actually did very, very well. He is the type of person, though, that actually wanted change and had very like idealistic ways of how he wanted to work, and probably wasn't the most patient person in the world. But I also had significantly higher expectations than him. But I did because of the fact that I knew how intelligent he was, and I knew his ceiling was higher probably than most, right? Just like you'd probably think a vet's ceiling is higher than most. Fair or not, you do, right? You know, this is family, and
no, I do.
Yeah. And so the reality is it's hard because you have this like fine line between how you treat them from just a HR compliance legal standpoint, but also but you know, right? But also in all reality, the fact that you can hold them to higher expectations, but you also have to be on the same page with them so they understand that there's a purpose behind why you're doing that. It's because they should have a longer term vision on how that business looks versus John Smith that you hired that probably isn't going to be the VP of Ops or something, right? Realistically, especially in a small business environment. So that was the same thing with my brother. Unfortunately, he has decided to do other things with his career, but he's always left on in the right way, and there's been no hard feelings with it. But it's just one of those things where working with family can be extremely hard, especially with someone like me. I think you and I are relatively similar, but I'm sure I'm harder to work for just because I've been told. But the reality is, I mean, they know because they're part of a gym thing with me, and so they know that I'm a giant pain in the ass even at the gym. So you can imagine working for me. But I think the reality behind it is I think most of it is just a certain level of passion that you have for the business since it's a family type of environment, and if people can understand that, it'll work out. So.
And I mean, the one thing I told my sister before wanting to come here and work with us and being very transparent, very honest, was you need to be 100% ready to come work for us. Because when you're in, you are 100% in or 150% in.
When you're family, you have to be,
And her and I have the same respect for my parents, and like they're immigrants. They built this from nothing. And so our goal is to see it keep growing and see it develop. And so you're not going to let it fail, or you're going to do everything you can to make sure it's successful. And so because of that, knowing how she is as well, I just know that, coming into this, like, I didn't leave. I said I was only going to be there for a few months, and I completely changed paths and went into business when I thought I was going to be a lawyer.
Yeah. Well, the cool thing about that is that when you wake up every day, relevant to if you're the owner, or if you're a COO, or if you're your sister that's coming in, is you just have, the way I feel anyways, and I presume you feel this way too, is you just have a different level of passion for the business versus if you're working for ABC company, right, where you don't really necessarily see a light at the end of the tunnel, right? You don't see like your parents are leaving a legacy and they work their asses off to get there, and I think both of you and her understand that, and so you want to make sure that legacy stays intact, and that's you're going to do everything possible to do that, right? And
definitely.
and I think in that situation, that's with you guys taking over business, but people that even work for family-owned businesses have to be prepared for understanding that if they're going to do that, the people that have actually grown that business, it's going to be, it's been a significant amount of work to even get to that point, and so the expectations are going to be fair or not unrealistic a lot of the time, and you have to be prepared for that, right? And if you're not, it has to be a very like transparent, candid conversation you have to have with them prior to engaging, because the reality is business still, and you have, proof's in the pudding with my brother, and we just found out it wasn't just a good fit long term, right? But the reality is that if you can't have those conversations, you can muddy the waters pretty quickly. So. So this was episode 9 with Miss Lizette. We were talking about how working with family and that kind of transition into process development and some of the errors that we both have made in the world of that, as well as the fun parts about working with family. So please like, subscribe, share, comment, all that fun stuff. It's going to be on YouTube, Instagram, SoundCloud, Facebook, all that fun stuff. Episode 9, Lizette, say bye to everybody.
Bye.